So I think that's coming on the law firm side only very differently. And you and I had talked about this. How is the legal industry different from other white collar services? And how do you build something that still has that enterprise value and that scalability and that integrity of the team where it's not transactional based? It's like, hey, we're building something where everybody's going to be rising with this tide. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that space, there's not a lot of people talking about it, to be honest.
So, let's talk about some of the big differences. So, you have to have a license. And if you have a license in one state, it does not carry over to the next state. So there's a regulatory licensing issue. Now, other professional service firms, some of them have that as well, but not all of them. There's the ownership issue, which, some of these, doctor practices and accountants have as well. But it's, up until very recently, only lawyers could own law firms.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, sell, or optimize your business. I'm joined by a really fun guest today, Jonathan Hawkins. Jonathan is an attorney for attorneys. We're going to talk about private equity roll-ups and law firms and all kinds of different things involving the legal side of his practice. But he founded and runs LawFirmGC.com. He helps other attorneys navigate the complexities of business transition planning, partner splits, and other critical issues. He's basically a GC for law firms. But Jonathan, welcome to the show, man. Excited that we could do this.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Looking
for sure.
forward to it.
So I always start with the story. Catch us up on who you are, how you got into the space, how you built your business, and then we'll dig into a little bit more tactical of a conversation than we normally have. So I'm super excited about it. So tell us about building your firm, why you decided to build a firm as opposed to just be a solopreneur, and maybe a few stories from that journey.
Sure. Like most, I have a winding path. So I've been an attorney since 2003. I started out doing primarily business disputes. I was doing a lot of business divorces, closely held businesses of all types. And then I started getting into law firm breakups, and that sort of led me down the path of my current sort of niche practice representing lawyers and law firms. But it might be important to talk about.
Are law firm breakups as messy as you would think they would be, with highly educated people that have the tools to be litigious, or is it more sterile than we would think?
Some of them are very litigious. Others, they realize, look, it's not worth the fight, and they sort of work it out. Most of them work out fairly quickly, although, ego's involved and hurt feelings, so it can flare up at any moment. But, some of the bigger ones, you got the egos, you got the smart people, you got trained, professionals in the space, and you've got a lot of money that they're fighting over. So those can get pretty heated and last a while.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so forming my firm, this is sort of an interesting story. So I was a partner at my last firm for a number of years, and a college friend of mine and a longtime client who does not run a law firm. He owns a business that develops and operates senior living communities. Over the years, we had talked about, maybe trying to do something, and we tried some side businesses here and there, but nothing really panned out. Well, I guess he had been partners with his dad and his brother, and they sold the last community that they had together, and they were separating, going their different ways. But, my friend, longtime client, wanted to keep going. He's like, I'm going to keep going. He says, hey, do you want to come join me? He's like, I'm not sure what you'll be doing. You come on as general counsel, and we'll sort of see what we do. So in February 2018, I left my firm and joined his company as general counsel part-time, but it was a startup. completely. And so I needed to keep a law firm going. So I needed some more income. So I spun off a part-time law firm too. And that was my firm now. So LawFirmGC. And I cut out, a lot of the non-lawyer type of work I was doing. So I had a part-time law practice, and I was working for this real estate company part-time. And we can get into some of that, but I'll tell you, working inside that company taught me a ton, just a ton on the business side, and seeing, it was basically a startup, and seeing the things that were going on there have helped me along the way with my law firm as well. But
was it primarily acquisition work? So kind of reviewing assets and seeing if they were going to be a good fit? Was it or were you doing all of it plus helping to run the business? The reason I ask is I'm involved in an oil and gas company, and we had 2 attorneys on staff for almost a decade. And the attorney that worked for me for a long time, since 2016, is just a brilliant guy. But he ended up kind of being what we would call the integrator in EOS for me. Like he would help, he was a professional problem solver. And so he could not only paper the deals we were doing and, hopefully keep us out of litigation and hopefully, give us some wisdom when we got into litigation, but also really just help us to scale the business and build up processes and find issues that we needed to solve. So was that similar, or like what were some of the things you learned as you built the business alongside, scaling your law firm?
Well, the idea was that I was going to quit practicing law altogether. I was going to shut my firm down, quit. I was going to go into the deal side. That was the plan. And so, because I have a legal background, I would sort of manage the legal stuff. And we had outside people that would actually paper the deals. We wanted to offload that risk of a
sure. Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Out there. But, the idea is that we would, I'd move away. And so the model of that firm historically had been, find a piece of property, develop a site, stabilize it, and then sell it, and then go on to the next one. That historically was the model, and it morphed over time to where, the projects got bigger. They had 2-3 phases. Then it got to the point where maybe we would hold on and build a portfolio and sort of manage. And then, of course, as it grew, more employees, more stuff just going on. There's just more stuff going on. And so just more legal issues and others. Recently, I left the company. I stepped down as a full-time or as a part-time employee. There's still a client, but I left to really focus on the law firm. And we can talk about that if you want to, but
yeah, let's talk about that. So you're doing more generalist work in the business space, real estate development, and then walk us through. We talk a lot about mindset. So what changed mindset wise, and what was part of that journey that led you to say, hey, 2 part-time, full-time jobs, which is generally how they end up being. You're working 30 hours here and 30 hours there and another 10 wherever you can find it. But walk us through that journey of saying, hey, I'm going to go all in on the firm. And then your focus is very unique. So I do want you to talk about that, because I want our audience to have you as a resource as well on that side.
Well, sure. The senior living space, I think, has significant tailwinds with the aging population. There's not enough product out there. There are issues within it. Like we focused on the super high end side. So self-pay, high end. So everyone, our customers could afford it. But there's a huge swath of people who can't really afford it. But there are tailwinds to that business, and that was part of what interested me. But then, the projects got bigger, which meant they took longer. COVID hit, and then interest rates went up. All sorts of just macroeconomic things happened to the business. And so, they've got some incredible pipeline of projects, but, it's going to take a long time. And
for sure.
Part of it is there were so many things not in my control over there. Where on the law firm side, there are always things out of my control, but it was easier for me to turn some knobs, and I could almost immediately see impact to my income. So part of it was, all right, well, I can focus over here and increase my income a little bit. So that was part of it. But the bigger part was, our firm, we have a unique niche. There really aren't any other firms like ours. There may be 1 or 2 around the country, small boutiques that look sort of like ours. And part of me, I look out there and I feel like there's a blue ocean for what I want to do.
For sure.
And I think we talked about it, but I was at the gym one morning in between sets. I'm sitting on a bench listening to a podcast or something, and it just sort of hit me that, if I'm on my deathbed and I don't go for it, I'm just going to regret it. And then the next thought was, and if someone else does it and it's not me, I'm just going to be pissed off. So I was like, I have to do it. So that morning, that's when I decided, all right, I'm going to start focusing on this firm and turn it from what had been a lifestyle part-time firm. I was doing great. I mean, the good thing about a solo law practice is your overhead is like nothing. So your profit margins, in the 90s, percentage, because you have no overhead. So, but as you grow and you start adding people and all these other things, so my revenue's gone up since, but my profit margins have gone down, and my headaches have gone up too. But
your enterprise value has probably gone up, I would guess.
Yes.
Right. And so
sure.
I want to touch on a really important point that you made, which is, so we buy businesses, real estate, and oil and gas assets and do advisory work for folks that are buying those assets. And we've done a lot of transactions, hundreds of transactions in that space. One of the reasons we started acquiring businesses as part of our family office, kind of 10 years ago, or I guess longer, 2012, we were buying real estate and we got to the point where we're like, all right, we've stabilized these assets and there's no other levers, right? So like rent rates are as high as they can be, whether it be multifamily, we were doing vacation rentals, we were doing raw land acquisition. So you get that asset and you stabilized it. And then it's like, what do we do next? Well, we buy more real estate. And that's okay, right? We like that model. There's all kinds of benefits, especially on the tax side and 1031 exchanges. And there's tons of reasons to own real estate. But we just said, hey, we've got a skill set that's not giving us leverage in this asset class. And our skill set is optimizing businesses, running teams, leadership, et cetera. So then we started applying that to businesses, and we coach a lot on that. So it's like, man, if you buy a business or own a business, there's literally millions of levers, right? Like you can say, hey, I want this to be a solopreneur lifestyle business and I want to make $500,000 a year. Great. But if you decide, hey, I want to build something with enterprise value, I mean, the sky's the limit, right? We can have a different strategy that we're going to apply. We can go to a different niche. We can expand to different markets. We can hire more salespeople. We can improve our operational chops. We can roll out this system. We can do sales funnels. And we love that, right? Because in business, you don't get bored. As soon as you've kind of somewhat mastered a piece of it, then you're like, okay, to get to the next level, we have to be excellent at these three things that we don't have skills in. So we've got to go get those skills. So when we talk about real estate acquisition or business acquisition, I always say it's kind of your competencies and then, your goals. So if you're like, hey, I just want to keep it somewhat passive, real estate is still not passive. People that say it's passive, I'm like, that's BS. But, it's lower, it's not as active as business ownership. But then, hey, do you have the competencies to do something bigger? And then do you have the desire to grow something that's got enterprise value? That's awesome. So let's talk about thinking about that transition from solopreneur, right? If you're in white collar services, whether you're a financial advisor or a CPA or you're an attorney, A&D advisor, whatever it is, you can make really great money, right? You can make plenty of money in the US to do everything you want to do, have a great life. And at some point, you can probably do it in a way where you're not working that many hours. But we've got a lot of clients that make that transition where they say, man, I was making great money, but I want to build something that when I exit, I'm going to make 10, 20, 30, $40 million of enterprise value when I sell it. And I also want to have a team. I want to build something that's self-governed that kind of operates primarily without me, although I think you always have to be in your business to some degree. But what made you decide to make that transition? Was that kind of that mindset shift of, hey, if I'm 80 or when I die, this is something I wanted to do, or was it something else?
Well, that was definitely a big piece of it. Part of it is just the challenge. I'm the kind of person that just gets bored. Once I figure it out, I need a new challenge. And I'd sort of figured it out. And so that was part of it. The other part was I had stopped business development efforts for my law firm. I just really didn't do anything, where early in my career, I did a lot of stuff and I just stopped. But all those efforts from early on were continuing to just throw work my way. And then it got to the point where I was going to have to start turning the work away, which is always a scary proposition because if you turn one away, they may not send anymore. So then you're okay. And so part of it was I was just getting really busy, and I started to supplement with some contract type employees, contract attorneys. So that helped. But then, you continually hit these caps and you hit these ceilings of what you can do. And then the other thing with being a solopreneur, at least in my experience, you do have to do everything. You get to keep more, but you have to do
sure.
everything. So if you want to go on vacation, it's either nothing's going to get done while you're gone, or you're going to be doing stuff while you're on vacation. And as you build teams, then you can, people can help you do those sorts of things. But also, again, it goes back to, I think there's a challenge I've had, a lot of my, I went to Georgia Tech undergrad, and, been blessed. A lot of my friends from there have been really, really successful business people of all types. And just talking with them and seeing them do things, I was like, why can't I do that? And the law is historically, traditionally, I think, difficult to scale in the way that other businesses do. I mean, it's the classic pyramid, professional service pyramid scheme. That's how you traditionally scale. And I want to try to do something a little different.
Let's dig into that, because one of those questions that I had is, we help folks acquire and sell white-collar service companies. That's one of our biggest niches. And each one is very different. And the CPA side, which is having a massive private equity roll-up consolidation, which I hate. I'm totally opposed to it and have been very verbally opposed to it. So I think that's coming on the law firm side, only very differently. And you and I had talked about this. How is the legal industry different from other white-collar services? And how do you build something that still has that enterprise value and that scalability and that integrity of the team, where it's not transactional based? It's like, hey, we're building something where everybody's going to be rising with this tide. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that space, there's not a lot of people talking about it, to be honest.
So, let's talk about some of the big differences. So, you have to have a license. And if you have a license in one state, it does not carry over to the next state. So there's a regulatory licensing issue. Now, other professional service firms, some of them have that as well, but not all of them. There's the ownership issue, which, some of these doctor practices and accountants have as well. But it's, up until very recently, only lawyers could own law firms. That's breaking up. We can get into that in a minute, but there are some other states that are starting to break that up. It's going to be slow. I think there are going to be hold-on states that just fight tooth and nail till the very, very end. So it's still going to be a challenge nationwide. But I think a bigger challenge for law firms, the way I see it, is in law, it's baked into the ethics rules that you cannot have restrictive covenants with your attorneys. So no non-solicits, no non-competes at all. There are two exceptions. One is if you sell your practice completely, and the other exception is if you retire and you're getting retirement benefits.
So why is that, Jonathan? Is that just a holdover from older kind of regulatory legislation that, hey, the law practice should be treated differently, or is it there is a legitimate reason and it should be maintained that way?
Well, I can tell you the reason that they give. I don't know if it's pretext or not, but the policy justification is that it is so important that a client be able to choose their lawyer that we are not going to take that right away from the client. Doctors, you can choose any doctor you want. It's not important you stay with your doctor, but lawyers, you got to stay with.
All heart surgeons are the same. They're all the same.
Exactly. And so, part of it is, I just think way back when they baked it in for whatever reason, and nobody wants to take it away. There are instances, I'll say, that maybe it's that prohibition is weakened a little bit in some jurisdictions, but it's pretty much universal. So it's baked into the ethics rules. So not even is it illegal and not enforceable, it's technically unethical to try to put one of these in your agreements. And so as you're building a firm, you're building your clients, and part of the fear, a lot of my clients are like, well, I don't, I'm so busy, but I'm scared to hand over clients and work to these other attorneys because they'll get to know them and then they'll leave and take them. So that's, you can't, so that's the other side of the coin. You can't lock down the attorneys, and then the clients have an absolute right to choose. So you have this attorney you've hired, you train them up, you hand them over to your clients, and then they say, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore, and they leave. They have a right to tell all the clients that they've talked to, that they know, come with me.
So they have active solicitation right, essentially, as opposed to a lot of financial advisors can't actively solicit. but they can call and say, hey, I've made a move and here's where I'm at. And you can choose any firm you want to work with, including me. But lawyers can say, hey, I'm leaving. I want to take you as a client. We work well together and you should come over with me. Is that the distinction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, most states have ethics opinions that go a step further and say you have an obligation to tell the clients that your attorney's leaving and that they have a right to choose. They can choose to stay, they can choose to go, or they can choose to go hire somebody else. And you almost have this obligation to tell them that. So it's now you could, like, if we were in the same firm and we had an agreement and I say, Chris, you're going to take these 4 and I'm going to take these 4, we could recommend, say, look, client, we recommend you go with Chris. They still get to choose, but we can sort of steer them where we'd want them to go if we have an agreement. But if we don't have an agreement, free game. It's like Jerry Maguire, we're calling. Everybody's calling. It's crazy.
I think, though, if I'm in your shoes, that poses a really fascinating, fun problem to solve, which is how do you create a culture and incentives with your team to keep them where you are? Because ultimately, like we've gone through so many situations with our businesses of non-competes and whether they're enforceable, whether they're not enforceable. And at the end of the day, what I've said is, look, if someone wants to leave, they can leave. If they can take the clients, that means they're better at what they do than we are. So be it, right? We have to create a culture around retaining people where, hey, this is the best opportunity, both financially and just lifestyle, et cetera. And the same for our clients. Like if we stop growing and somebody else who does what we do does a better job, they should, in my opinion, right? The free market says they should earn that client. So how have you thought about that? Because you're obviously trying to build something that's probably different than maybe some of your peers and what they're building.
Yes, I think about it all the time for myself, but then also for my clients. So, when firms are breaking apart, these are the issues I deal with all the time. So, I call it the sort of the belt and suspenders approach. So obviously you want to create a culture where your attorneys and your employees hopefully never want to leave. And so whether it's through compensation or growth opportunities or benefits that you can offer in terms of scale and scope of your services, that if they left, they may only be able to do a piece of what you do as a whole. So that's part of it. And then the other part is to, I think, create a service offering and a scope of services that the clients can't live without. So if they left with an attorney who they're going to develop a close relationship with their relationship attorney. I mean, it's just natural. But if that attorney leaves and says, well, I only can do this one sliver of all the things the firm was offering you or perform with you, the client may be more willing to say, you know what? I like you, Chris, but I really want access to this platform or whatever that the firm has. Yep. So those are some of the ideas. I got a bunch of others too, but that are,
Could we camp on two of those? So I love to hear folks' views on culture. So as you think about, so there was a great book written by, I think it was Pink, maybe Daniel Pink or something like that, called Drive. And it talked about, hey, motivations for folks that are kind of sub 50 have changed. And it's a lot more, they want to be, and I'll probably get these wrong, but it's generally these buckets. They want to know that they're working for a mission, right? That's something that's pursuing humans flourishing or something great, right? Something that's actually a big mission, kind of a big M mission. They want to do work that's fulfilling, that they have unique abilities for, and they want to be compensated correctly. However, the compensation leg of that was actually kind of, from a ranking perspective, is lower. And we found that in our team is, so anyways, I'd love to hear, like, how would you say you build the right culture, especially in an industry that is transactional? It's about billable hours. Like whoever is billing the most hours is king. And they may have the worst culture. They may be the biggest jerk ever, but that's been rewarded historically in the legal and accounting industry. So tell me a little bit about how you're thinking through that. Great
question, and something I'm working on every day. I don't have all the answers, but I will say this. So billable hours, I think that I hate it. I hated it. I've always hated it. It's just the bane of every lawyer's existence. So, part of what we're building and trying to build are service offerings where it's not really billable hours. Now, you still need to track, these sorts internally, but, we do a lot of flat fee offerings. We're developing subscription style offerings. And so I personally want to build a place where, you go to the big firms and they're like, goal 2,000 hours a year, but what that really means is maybe 22, 24, maybe more type hours a year. And it is not a way to exist. And so part of what we offer is we're not going to make you do that. And so it's a better life. I don't want to call it a lifestyle firm, but our culture is going to be more accommodating to people's lives. And then the other piece, if everything's not tied to being a slave to the billable hour, then it can open up the firm to other opportunities for people to fill other roles in the firm. Another thing I've seen with law firms, both my personal experience and just being in the industry, is, most lawyer comp, it's like 2 or 3 elements. It's how many hours you bill and how much work did you bring in. And that's all they comp on. And that's all anybody focuses on. Forget about team building, mentoring, training, all the other management, all the other things that any healthy organization needs. And so you sort of put that aside. So that's part of it. Another piece I think about too is, lawyers are good at certain things and they're not good at other things. Some of them are great technicians. Some of them are natural sales, business developers. And you shouldn't ask the technician to try to go generate business and vice versa. And so, part of what I'm thinking long-term as we grow is that we're going to fill the right people in the right spots with their right skill sets and give them opportunities for growth within that. And it may mean hiring non-lawyers for those spots.
Yep, absolutely. And that was one of the questions. So as we think about non-attorneys being able to own law firms, give us your perspective on that, because that has been something we've looked into, is like, could we acquire a law firm in Arizona? Because I've done contracts like forever, just because we've done so many transactions and had attorneys. And so as I've thought about, man, like when we hire outside counsel, for example, hey, communication's poor, it's not outcome based, it's billable hours based. There's all they're business problems, not legal problems, right? They're business problems that are plaguing every business. And I'm like, they really need this type of person, like you said, a non-lawyer that's running these things, that's running their marketing and their sales and these things. So what's your perspective around that? And how do you think the industry is going to go over the next 10 years if you had a crystal ball?
So it's already happening. Private equity is already in, and they're, exploring some of the structures that you've seen in, the medical and accounting, where you sort of split the firm apart and you isolate the attorneys. They're exploring those sorts of structures. And then in Arizona, it's just flat out, if you get approved, you can just own a law firm, so you don't even have to worry about that structure. And we're going to keep seeing that. The pretext or what they said, we're going to open it up to help provide access to justice. There's this huge percentage of the population that cannot afford a lawyer and can't do it. So they thought maybe if we open it up, it will bring in money to innovate. Well, what really seems to be happening is all the money is going to the personal injury, big ticket, types of practices, and there's not a whole lot of innovation going on.
I could see
and so
that.
we'll see how it plays out. But, if you go back, so DC has had non-lawyer ownership for much longer.
Interesting.
But theirs is different. It's more of what I think non-lawyers should be able to own law firms. But more specifically, if I hire a non-lawyer COO, I should be able to give them some equity in the firm to incentivize them, buy them in if I want to. But you can't do that right now in most jurisdictions. Now, DC, if you check some boxes, that could work. But even let's say, I've got a receptionist, and I want to align interests top to bottom of the firm and do some sort of either internal ownership pool or
phantom equity or something like that.
Phantom equity. Now you could do profit sharing, but it's not the same in my view. So I am in favor of allowing non-lawyers to own. Now what that ultimately looks like, devil's in the details. We'd have to look. And ultimately, if I build a big, valuable firm, I may want the ability to sell it. And not many lawyers are sitting on a big pile of cash to be able to buy it. So,
Yep, that's really interesting.
Do you like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now and check out our website, www.excoadvisors.com. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
So let's transition a little bit. Our audience, and we coach a lot of young entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of young attorneys that are entrepreneurs, yourself included. So if you were talking to somebody who is 10 or 15 years younger than you, and they're thinking about, hey, traditional law, start my own business, this totally different incentive structure, cultural based, subscription based, like what's some advice you would give for them? Because I know, I assume the legal space is similar to accounting and financial advisory, where it's like, man, we don't have enough young people coming into these businesses. They think it's boring, or they don't think it's worth the squeeze of putting in a decade of work to actually get this thing. So if you were 10 years younger, or if you had somebody coming out, son or a daughter that was coming into the space, what's some advice you would give them on building out that plan?
That is a really great question. And I don't know exactly. I look out at the legal landscape. They've been calling for the death of the billable hour for decades. With the way AI is coming on, I think it's going to chip away substantially. But you look at it, and AI can replace a lot of work that maybe a lot of paralegals do, and maybe a first, second, third year associate do, which is great for the more experienced attorneys. But part of being a first and second year is you get in there and you see all the stuff, and that's how you learn. And so if AI spits out this legal memo, I can read it and be like, yeah, that's wrong. It's hallucinating. But a young associate who's not gone through the training won't be able to know the difference. So I do have concerns for training long-term with AI, but on the efficiency side, I think it's going to change the way a lot of firms bill. I think probably they're finally going to move away from hourly billing and probably move towards some sort of flat fee or retainer type model again. And so what is that going to do? I think at some of the big firms that have been relying on, lots of bodies to bill lots of hours, it's going to change. So there's going to be a lot of attorneys that are going out on their own, I think. And so they're going to need to be able to function. And so, my dad was an attorney, and early on in my career, he gave me some really good advice. He said, you need street skills. And what that meant to him at the time was, if every lawyer in your firm was on a plane and it crashed and you had to go make a living the next day in the law, what would that entail? So, how to get clients, how to manage clients, how to manage a deal or a litigation, from start to finish, not just a piece.
Yep, for sure.
All the stuff, if I had to go just open up hang my shingle and open up a firm, could I do it? And so that would be my advice to a young attorney, at least. Get out there, get as much experience, street skills as you can. Another piece of advice is, these things change all the time. And so you got to be curious. You got to keep learning.
I love that.
It's the old saying, do you have 20 years experience or 1 year experience 20 times?
That's right. For sure. 10,000 hours, the mastery concept. And I think too, like that's where AI to me is fascinating. We've said at our family office, like we're an innovation company. Like we might own these asset classes, we might do these things, but at the end of the day, like we have to always be innovating because it's changing. And AI is fascinating in white collar services because all of the businesses we own will be disrupted dramatically. And I'll give you an example. So in oil and gas, we go drill these units and we may have 200 leases, right, on a single unit, or we may have one lease. But as we were doing a development up in North Dakota, our team said, hey, we missed in due diligence. We realized that there's not a force majeure clause in this lease, and a force majeure incident happened. It begs the question, how many of our leases don't have this clause, right? Should have been caught by humans, wasn't caught by humans. So we were able to use an AI script to basically go through every single one of those 1,000 leases or hundreds of leases and just basically say, hey, here's the lease we would like to have with all the provisions. Which of these leases don't have those provisions in it? Create a document that talks to us about that. And then pretty quickly, we're like, oh crap, there's like 20 leases that now we need to get that addendum added to it. And now we've got to talk to them about damages because they're going to want something for this addendum. Anyways, now we can create something that on the front end is a secondary screen for our due diligence team or our onboarding team that says, okay, we're still going to have humans look at it, but also AI, be looking for these things and spit out these questions about why doesn't it have this, or why is this language different? And so, there may be 2 or 3 people that aren't needed in that space now because of that, or maybe 100 people. But at the end of the day, our goal is like, we want to drive great returns to our investors. And so how do we do that? One of the ways is minimizing our mistakes, right? Like, we can't be making mistakes on the acquisitions, and you always will be, because there's a lot to be read, but so it's fascinating. So let me ask you, and we generally try to keep these around kind of 30 to 40 minutes. So I want to wind down here in a bit, but two questions I want to close with. One is bad advice you heard along your journey. And then the final that I always close with are tools, resources, books, things that you're like, man, I'm loving this thing. It's highly useful, and I'd like to share it with the audience. But let's start with the bad advice question, because I love the answer to this one.
Bad advice, probably tons. I try to move on from that quickly. But, one that stands out to me. So I'm sort of I just love marketing and business development. I really love that. And so many years ago, in lots of non-law businesses, email marketing and your list, whether it's a mailing list or an email list, is a huge thing. Yeah. When the law, most lawyers, it just doesn't dawn on them. I have often lamented about a lot of law firms. They're sitting on gold mines, their old client lists that they're not doing anything with.
For sure.
So early on, I had my own email list, and I would send an email every week. And I had people on the list, and I remember having one person on the list, and he kept emailing me back. He's like, "You're sending it too much. You got to send it once a month at the most." And I just did not agree with that at all. So I just took him off my list, and I kept sending it every week. And
For sure.
I'm convinced that weekly email is really what helped me build my practice. And if I had not done that, I don't think I'd be where I am today. So that's one piece of, I think, bad advice. And luckily I didn't listen to it.
Yeah. And we've had a saying in our family office: you must own your own digital real estate. And even that means like you own it. It's in your own CRM. It's not in someone else's CRM. It's not in social media. And we had this incident. We're partnering up with this really brilliant data architect. And he's got this amazing web Facebook platform where basically he gets all these communities started in Facebook and then figures out ways to generate leads for white collar service and blue collar service, and also just create all of this amazing content and value for this community. Well, Facebook last week shut like 10,000 groups down. And for no reason. They were like, yeah, there's some sort of discriminatory blah, blah, blah. But it was across like thousands and thousands of Facebook groups that did not have commonality. And so he was like, oh, wow, this is a perfect segment for us to say, hey, let's go right into this and figure out how do we take them out of Facebook, Instagram, whatever your platform is, and actually get them into your architecture. Because if you don't own it, at any point in time, Facebook could not like it, or any of those platforms say, hey, we don't like you, Jonathan, because you're doing this thing that is against Facebook. And so we've always said you've got to own your own digital real estate. And that may be the most valuable piece of your business when you sell it. And so if you can nourish that digital real estate and grow it, like, that's massive. So talk to us about the tools or books you're reading, or things that you're just like, in 2025, this is the 1 or 2 things that I've just gotten the most value out of.
All right, I'm going to talk about a podcast. So I've been listening. I don't know when I found this podcast, but it is, and I'm a huge consumer of podcasts. It is one of my favorites right now. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Founders. Have you listened to Founders?
Oh yeah, that is a really good podcast.
Gosh.
I agree.
I mean, oftentimes he'll digest a book, an autobiography or a biography, but sometimes he's, if there's not a book, he's going to interviews and all these things, and he takes incredible notes, but he's got this huge library of all these other people. So he's bringing in, if he's talking about Sam Walton, he's also bringing in Bezos and somebody else and all these people.
That's great. Yeah. And
it's just phenomenal. I get so much inspiration, but also really good, knowledge practical, that I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something like that. And so that is top recommendation for anybody out there who wants to grow a business or has aspirations to do something big. I think studying other people who've done it, and it makes them, a lot of times you see these people who accomplished all this and you're like, man, they're different than I am, or I could never do that, or whatever.
For sure.
But then you hear these stories that they're just normal people.
100%.
Normal people. So
that's right. I love that. So the Founders Podcast. So Jonathan, as we wrap up, first of all, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. This has been awesome. This is going to help a lot of people, but where can people find you? How can they support you? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have a podcast? Should they reach out on LinkedIn or email? Where should people look for you?
Sure. So the website is LawFirmGC.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post there pretty much every day. So that's a good place. Please connect with me there. I will accept. I do have an email newsletter. It's really geared towards lawyers. But if you're a professional service firm owner, there might be some stuff in there that would be helpful for you. You can find that, sign up on my website. Love to have you. So, and Chris, thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, man. Have a great day, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.